Good afternoon. I'm Julia DeNatale. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Napa Valley Community Foundation, and it's an honor to be here with you today to talk about funding. Um, like all of you, I also went to the School of Hard Knocks, so you don't need me to tell you the things that I normally say here about how disaster doesn't discriminate, but recovery does, about how funding is easy when the news vans are around, and then very hard after the news vans decamp. Um, and I'm just so excited to have these two here today to talk about their experience and how they've worked in community to really help two different places that have been hit very, very hard recover. Before I begin, I just want to share a little bit about my organization, Napa Valley Community Foundation. We entered into the disaster recovery space in 2014 after we had a 6.0 earthquake. And we entered somewhat unwillingly and pretty unwittingly. And since that time, we have distributed $30 million across two major fires, pandemics, storms, public safety power shutoffs, which many of you who are not from the area won't be familiar with. And nearly 20 million of that was distributed directly to people in the community who had been affected, who were not eligible for other forms of aid, and who were really trusting our nonprofit partners. And so today we're going to talk about what funding and philanthropy looks like, why it's community based. I know we're all a little bit worried about the future. I can say for us, um, as the frequency of disasters has increased, the amount of dollars we're raising after each disaster has decreased. And so here we are today to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned. And we have Keanu and Nina here, and I'm going to turn to them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their experience in disaster, and then we'll have some questions.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keanu Lau Hee with Hawaii Community Foundation. And we are very fortunate due to the generosity from over 200,000 donors across the 70 countries and all of the United States to have collected just under $200 million for Maui's recovery. Of that, we've since put out just over $160 million of those dollars within the first 2 years. And you're right, the most of the funds came in over the first 6 months, $174 million over the first 6 months. And our team of one, myself and another person who's here with me today, Kehao, worked extremely hard in the beginning, putting out over $1 million in the first week into the community and then escalated thereafter. My experience with disaster personally started many years ago at the actual Maui Emergency Management Agency, and it was so old we were called Civil Defense. And I'm a formally trained emergency manager, but during the 2023 wildfire, I was a County of Maui employee working for our mayor in the back, Mayor Bisson. Later became the deputy managing director who helped establish Maui's Office of Recovery. Then got recruited to work at the foundation. So the Hawaii Community Foundation is one of the oldest foundations in the country. It's over 100 years old. And we service all of the state of Hawaii, and it's the only community foundation. And without the partnership of our community partners, we wouldn't have been able to do the work that we did on Maui.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nina Revoyr. I'm the executive director for Los Angeles, as well as national public safety for Ballmer Group. Ballmer Group is essentially a family philanthropy, a large family philanthropy. And I just want to start first off by saying thank you to Jennifer, to After the Fire, and also to everybody who has come from the disasters before our disaster and has stood up to help and stand by Los Angeles. I have met many of you on the delegations that you have joined coming to LA. I've met more before. Understand that in addition to carrying your own pain, that you have left your homes and families to come and stand with us. I just cannot thank you enough or tell you how much that has meant to us or how much help that has provided. Yeah. And and Keanu, I know that we have bothered you, more than once because of the incredible leadership and example that you have provided. Because of course, as you all know, when something like this happens, you think there is no playbook because you haven't done it. But in fact, sadly, there has been a bit of a playbook, and so we have learned from others before us. Ballmer Group is an economic mobility funder. We are focused on helping low-income kids and families. That means that we do fund in very specific kind of strategic priorities that are pretty directive. And we're also Angelinos, the LA office, and so that means that we want to stand up and help when the community is in crisis, whether that is an exact fit for what we are doing or not. We did the same during COVID, and did a bunch of emergency response then. And then, of course, it turns out that actually many of the things that come up in a fire do actually intersect with some of the things that we care about. Things like needs of kids and students, things like mental health, things like the workforce, who's actually going to do the rebuild, things like, of course, both interim and long-term housing. So we pivoted a little bit in order to respond immediately to the fires, but it also was in subjects that we knew quite a bit about. So we immediately put out $15 million about 2 weeks after the fires, and then actually influenced by what we were learning both from the community, and I know that's a question later, but as well as from some of the delegations who talked about the needs of kids, mental health needs particularly. We put another tranche of 10 million right before the summer to make sure that kids had the supports that they needed, and are also looking at some of the bigger things that are going to come up as we are shifting to recovery.
Thank you both. And Nina, since you brought it up, I'm gonna go a little out of order here and talk about um, how there's a lot of intersections, as you've seen with your regular day-to-day non-disaster work. What adaptations have either both of you made to your organization's core mission based on what you've seen with those intersections with disaster?
I think the kind of hard thing, and I can't speak for a community foundation perspective, which I think is kind of broader to start. Uh, I have a day job, and my day job is making sure that my staff and my team and I are helping low income kids have better opportunities for a greater future through education, through jobs, etc. And so that doesn't stop while we're also doing recovery. And so there was actually quite a bit of a whole bunch of schools burned down, both in Altadena and then in the Palisades, early childhood centers, kids who suffered incredible, I mean, everybody suffered incredible trauma. But kids who don't necessarily have the tools to, respond, adapt, understand what's happening was a particular focus for us. So it's more about, we had these two lanes. Here's the fire recovery and here's everything else. And it's more about how do you bring those things together that is going to be true in a way that supports both. And so just to give you one example, we have a major issue right now about who's actually going to do the rebuild. We have, 12,000 homes, I don't know how many businesses, someone out here I don't knows. So many things that actually need to be redone. We don't actually have the trained workforce in place to do them. And so we're shifting from what used to be a focus on what we would call hard to employ workers, reentry population, former foster youth, people, et cetera, to now saying, okay, we actually have to help contribute to helping to support and build the workforce in order to rebuild the two sites. So that's an example. I would not say that we have worked this out perfectly, and I think really important to say we don't know, like, we are learning as we do. There is so much that we don't know. And so that is why it's so important to learn from what you have. You're just saying you've entered year three, you're a year and a half, little maybe 2 years ahead of us. Some of you are much longer ahead of us. We need to learn from all of you to figure out how to do this.
Um, I think because we are a community foundation, which I think you can appreciate, it's leaning in a little bit more into the work we normally do, helping vulnerable communities. And the opportunity that the generosity of the donors have given us is to really innovate in this space. And so to take recovery as an opportunity to demonstrate what's possible when both government and philanthropy align to help create some systems change. I think that's been an opportunity for us to lean a little bit heavier into the work we're already doing, but focused in Maui's recovery.
Thanks. So we know that disasters take many, many years to address. And, some funders choose one particular phase in which to work, and some choose all. How have you seen philanthropy shift or fail to shift to work across all the stages?
I think for Maui, we've been very fortunate that our philanthropic partners, we've formed a coalition, Maui Recovery Funders Collaborative, where we learn together, we all learn about the four phases of disaster and how to deploy those philanthropic dollars out strategically. And because of that, I think we've been able to fund together, but also be really thoughtful on what we're funding and how we're doing so. I think it's the approach at this point that's really important. Just understanding that recovery needs are evolving and changing over time, and that to continue to be adaptive to the needs of our community. So I think it's a two-way part, but oftentimes we learn from each other and really well informed by a lot of our really excellent program officers who are doing the work in the community with the nonprofits.
Yeah, I think, and you all know this, and you both certainly know this better than we do. Um, there's no like there are phases, but there's no clear like calendar. Okay, you go through months to 1, 2, 3, and then you're done with this phase and you're onto this one. It doesn't work that way. We still, on the one hand, you can say, okay, we're past immediate, relief, but we're not. There are people who are still struggling with the day to day. We have a looming crisis that is about to happen around housing and homelessness as people's temper is the insurance, runs out for people to rent places while they're trying to figure out what to do. Um, it, the folks are struggling to even those who do have a plan to rebuild or to move back or to move on don't necessarily have the resource, the things in place they need in order to do that. So the emergency is not over. And I think that's one of the hardest things to kind of come to terms with is that part continues. And I mean, you were just giving an example back in the green room about a family in crisis. How many years later? What year was that fire?
2020.
Okay, so 5 years later, and I'm sure there's stories from earlier than that. So, it's not like crisis completely ends. It's that other things happen. And I would say that, philanthropy is in LA, we did step up in, collectively, a whole bunch of organizations, Miguel and the California Community Foundation, Fire Aid, as you mentioned, other entities, individual organizations really stepped up on the relief piece, and it was a beautiful thing to see. It is never enough, and it never feels like enough even to us, and I just want people to know that who are not part of philanthropy. Um, you know, and, uh and sometimes that's not the most coordinated thing because everyone is just trying to get money out to help people. So, now with a little bit of room to breathe, you think about, "Okay, how can we think collectively?" To go back to that example about rebuilding. There's maybe a half a dozen funders that work pretty, intensively on workforce. Could we start thinking about doing that together so we're not duplicating or bothering the same grantees with the same questions or the same experts? And so I think that is starting to happen around the recovery. I think the rebuild is a whole nother, it's not like, and by the way, many of the people leading on the rebuild work and the recovery work are here. It's been incredible to see the work that has popped up, the creativity, the innovation, and other folks who are not in this room as well. So there's a lot of good things happening And that's both the benefit and it's also the challenge. There's a lot of good things happening. So what is the thing, and there isn't a thing, that's gonna kind of unlock the rebuild? So I think it's a work in progress. I think we're doing okay, but again, are continually looking at the folks who have been through this before us to learn from them. And I just like to again, I mean, I think I was bothering you the first time about your interim housing work in Maui, which we look at with great envy, so, still trying to figure it out.
Well, on that note, one of the places to look to figure things out is into community and into the people most affected. Can you talk about how you work with affected community members and other civic leaders in helping you shape your funding priorities and where you choose, the role for your particular foundation versus another funder?
Our community is not shy to tell us where we should put our dollars. So they're not afraid to let us know where we should put it. But we coordinate very closely with the government, especially Maui County, just because of my close ties there. We continue to hear from the long term recovery group of what those needs are. One of the strategic decisions we made early on, and I think I've stressed this to, Department of Angels and others, is to invest in data. The data will show you what those recovery needs are. And, again, they're not afraid to come up to you in the grocery store and let you know exactly where you should put your money. But we just continue to listen. And I think that's important to be responsive to what the needs are, to then collect the data, to then validate those needs. So it's not just anecdotal, and then to be adaptive to how we deploy those funds. And so I think, understanding that restrictions are important, but trust is also very important with as a funder with your grantees.
I think about that question in layers, like how you get feedback. And I think the short answer is as many ways as possible. We do engage quite directly with our government leaders. And I don't know if this has been talked about a lot today. I think Jennifer had made a point, or someone made a point about how complicated the LA fires are. And for those of you not from LA, there's no one person in charge because there's no one jurisdiction. The Palisades fire was in the city of Los Angeles. The Eaton fire was in Altadena, which is the county of Los Angeles. So it's not like the mayor, of Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles has oversight over the Eaton fire, just like the supervisor for the Altadena area doesn't have jurisdiction over the Palisades fire. It is a complicated mess. That means that if you are trying to work with the civic leadership, the government leadership, you are having to engage with all of those parties if you care about both those areas. So you're engaging with the city government, the county government. We have some folks from LA County here today. I don't know if we do also with the city. So there's that part, and it's interesting to hear from their perspective. The challenges, the issues, of course. Big question of ongoing federal, if there's going to be the federal funding coming in. There's that level. There's also the level of organizations. And Miguel talked this morning about having essentially that the CCF had this set of organizations that they already trusted through the COVID response. And so, organizations become both the pass-throughs for funding and relief, but also the ears on the ground for what is happening. I think that is really important, because people raise opportunities and challenges. Then there, of course, are fire survivors. And I think the importance of us in philanthropy, if we were not ourselves impacted, and I should say, we were not personally impacted by the fires, and, you know, b- had many close friends and colleagues. I mean, those of you who have engaged with me, this. Many friends in Altadena, who lost their homes. It's an area that that we know very well. I mean, when you saw the map up here of Loma Alta and the lake, I got engaged at the crux of that, at the top of that map. It's a place that is very important to me. And the Palisades obviously is hugely central to West Los Angeles and what people think of, the West Side people think of Los Angeles. To hear from people who have either lost their homes, um, and or as and I've met a couple of people today that I hadn't met, did not lose their homes, but are having to battle or experience trying to remediate them. Or, I have a couple of friends whose home in both areas whose homes were not burned, but are battling to get help or are being told that they don't have an issue or the insurance company isn't working with them. Like, it is deeply, um humbling, disturbing, upsetting, and you gotta consistently stay in touch with that. And then the other thing I do is precisely because I have the friends who have lost their homes, I will check what I hear. There are organizations that I love in this room where I like literally will turn around and be like to my friends, "Have you heard about these folks? What do you think about them?" And one of my real takeaways, and this has been borne out, and it's really also humbling, is that folks who are going through the kind of depth of crisis are, even when there is help or assistance available, either don't know how to access it, don't know where it's coming from, don't have the first idea of what to do. Miguel's story about his cousin who just had to say, "I can't think about it for a year." I have heard that from other people as well. It is just so overwhelming. And so I think just the importance for us of getting information from all the sources that we can, but also remaining proximate, even when it's not comfortable for us. Because you were, saying that people are not shy about telling you. I think it's really important that we continue to hear what folks need and how philanthropy can respond appropriately and differently when needed.
Absolutely. And speaking of concerns about the federal funding climate and the complexity of needs, we were talking about this in the green room a little bit um, in terms of nonprofit grantee burnout. How are you thinking about continuing to do this work in a world with so much uncertainty where there may be ways that you need to support your community and your grantees that go beyond traditional grant making?
I think there's a few things. There's some tangible things, including, I mean, it's a really tough moment and it's been our moment has not just been the disaster moment. It's been at least since COVID. Um, we were already starting to see fatigue, people leaving. And by the way, I've been in philanthropy. You came fairly recently. You'd been in the government side. I've been in philanthropy for 9 years now, but I was in the nonprofit world for almost 20 years before then. I know what it's like to hustle and scramble to make payroll, to keep people, try to keep people motivated to work, to deal with safety issues, to do all of that. Um, and what we were dealing with then is nothing compared to what nonprofits have been dealing with for the last 5 years. So if you layer on, um, COVID, the trauma of that, layer on the disaster, layer on all the federal funding cuts that have been happening, state funding cuts, it's really, really hard. So there are some tangible things that we have tried to do through Ballmer Group around helping with, and again, not enough, but important. How do we help with financial modeling? How do we help with organizational development? How do we help with just leadership work? How do we help have people be in community in ways that they're supporting each other? How do we become a little bit more flexible or understanding with our funding, multi-year, releasing, certain requirements, et cetera, those kinds of things. But not nearly enough. And it's really, really worrisome because when the helpers are struggling, um, that is a really tough situation.
Yeah, I think you know, being in year 3, just seeing some of our nonprofit fatigue, it's real. The stressors of the federal funding cuts really impact the organizations who are lean, right? They don't have large operating budgets. They operate on a very small margin. So I think our team tries to be extremely supportive. Um, understanding they've had to make tough calls over the years of how to maybe minimize their overhead. We look to help them connect with subject matter experts who can help to provide some of that support, but we also look at longer term down the road and think about Who are those critical nonprofit partners that need to be there for the community for the next disaster? And how do we now ensure that those nonprofits can sustain these federal funding cuts, can get a little leaner, can look at modernizing some of their operations to help reduce costs, and then also build community partnerships so we don't have multiple nonprofits offering the same service, but we have a variation of nonprofits providing the needs in the community. And so, through the lessons learned over the last 5 years, the foundation has responded to lava events, flooding, hurricanes, as well as COVID. And so, we're going to be over the next year collecting our grantee feedback. So at this point, we're going to call our grantees back together and then have the real talk with them. We've done, we don't call them after actions. We're not planning to call it an after action, but there's been an after action of government. There's been an after action of our public safety partners. But the nonprofit sector provided such a critical role in the post disaster landscape on Maui. What, as philanthropy, how can they tell us how do we get better? How do we get better at funding the nonprofits so that they then can provide the critical services and needs to the community in a post disaster environment? And that's what we seek to do. We seek to learn and then we seek to make adjustments in how we fund and fundraise to serve the needs of the community. And I think if we miss the opportunity to learn from the grantees and the survivors, then we've missed our opportunity to get better.
Yeah, I think oftentimes running a nonprofit, even a sophisticated nonprofit, feels like driving cross country in a car with a 1 gallon tank. I mean, it's just a struggle. And I mean, that was a huge lesson for me actually early on was so much of the work is in between disasters to support and stabilize those key grantee partners that you need to be there. You need them to be strong, you need them to be ready, and that is the case more so now than ever. We have a little time left. I'd like to ask you each to give us a piece of advice or a couple pieces of advice um, that you would give a funder who is stepping into fire recovery for the first time.
Hmm. Um, I don't usually give advice, but I think what I would recommend is invest in data. Again, it's very helpful to understand what the needs are in the community and be an advocate for the survivors. Sometimes as a funder, you have the ability to tap into other resources. Sometimes those resources are political figures, sometimes they're other funders, and to help advocate and educate for the needs of the community. I think we have as funders, you have an opportunity to also educate your teams that are not working directly with wildfire or fire recovery or recovery efforts on what it means to be resilient and how disasters impact greatly those who are already experiencing conditions that are not favorable. And so I think it's important for we call them blue skies, right? So blue skies time funders to understand that the resiliency starts in blue skies and then, is exacerbated during gray skies.
Like that. I think you had asked us to think about one, but I actually thought about a few things, and I would frame it less as advice and more kind of like lessons learned, and still learning. One of them is I think the importance and again, you guys have done a good job of this, and I know it didn't happen immediately, but of if you're a funder, um, trying to work with, communicate with, partner with the other funders in your space. Both because you can have more impact if you're working together, obviously, and you can kind of figure out, oh, you can do this over here, but I can do this over here, and maybe collectively we can have some greater effect. But also so that you're not bothering the same people. I mean, there were moments early on after the fires where we might be calling an organization, and I knew that they'd gotten a call from like 3, 4, 5, 8 other funders. They don't have time to talk to 8 of us. They've got to go help the people who have been impacted by the fires. So, both in the immediate, but also, and again, we're starting to do this around things like, who's gonna do the rebuild, to try and be a little bit more intentional, which is very hard in the moment when everyone is just trying to respond. So that's number one. And then related, how can you have the most, how can you leverage your piece the most effectively? Because while philanthropy has money, it is still a drop in the bucket compared to what the government can do, and particularly the federal government. And so how do you best not kind of supplant what the government is doing, but work alongside with, leverage, fill the gaps, et cetera? So that would be another piece. And then the second thing, and someone told me this right after, like literally right after the fires, and they were right, and I didn't listen, and now I'm trying to listen, which is focus. And because their focus for, and this is specifically for philanthropy, there are so many needs. There are so many people in need. We cannot, and I think folks who are doing the direct relief are also seeing this, you cannot meet every single need of every single person um, in our seats. And so how do we best, and there's 100 different subjects. So instead of doing poorly at 100 different things, and I'm speaking of us here, I'm not saying anyone else. Instead of doing poorly at 100 different things, how about if we really concentrate our time on getting like 2 or 3 or 5 things right? Or if not right, at least moving it down the field a little bit. And so we've tried to be more intentional about that. And things that we've been focused on, again, the kids and youth. Um, Also thinking about things like mental health, again, something that's been drummed into us by many of you here, because that's a long-term issue. It's not a short-term issue. It does not go away. Obviously, continue to think about the rebuild, and those are, three of the things. I got probably five, but trying to focus on just a few.
Yeah, that focus is a discipline, and it's a lot harder than it sounds when the needs are in your face and changing every moment. Well, I wanted to thank you both, Keanu and Nina, for sharing your hard-won wisdom with us, and you have reminded us that, um, recovery is, uh, very much not just about the dollars. It's about being an advocate and a partner and a collaborator and a listener and focusing on the relationships and being proximate and uncomfortable and open to hearing what the needs are because they may not be what you think they are. So thank you for representing philanthropy's role in a disaster, and it's an honor to see what you've done.